for me.
It shows we're live.
We are we?
Yes.
Good morning, good day, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you might be. Welcome to the Outreach Noah Studies in Genesis. If you have questions for us, please post them in to us at outreachnoah@gmail.com. And if they're within the realm of the current subject, they will be answered quicker. If not, they will be put aside for our next Q&A session. I'd like to welcome Terry. How are you this evening, Terry?
Doing well. We actually got the day off today. We normally don't.
Right.
We, they gave us the day off, but tomorrow, of course, it was without pay, but I'm using one of my PTOs, which is not a big deal because it's either I use it or lose it since we're this close to the end of the year. But spent the day doing some housework, things we've been needing to do. So it kind of, I was laying down on the couch a little bit before class and I almost dozed off. And I said, "Oh, I better not do that." As we down there. Let's see. It looks like we got Bob
Bob.
P coming in.
Yeah.
There we go. But yeah, it's been nice to have the day off. Normally we don't have this day off. But I think the last time they let us off on this day, because we're a dealership, we're a Toyota dealership. I think it was during COVID the last time.
Mm.
Things were kind of like really slow. But I guess we've really been having a pretty good year this year. Things are starting to pick back up, and we'll be glad to see some of the prices start coming down. Toyota's got some really interesting vehicles they're making right now. Looks like we might get one or two of them come to America. Um, there's some of them that's like pickup trucks for around $13,000. It's basic, no radios or anything in them. They're just a basic truck. I've been watching some videos on those. They might be coming here, and they're just real good, sturdy, basic everyday truck, just plain Jane, no frills on it. And with doing that, it keeps the price on down on them. But they are nice looking truck and everything. So, but again, it's been nice to have a day off. Rested a little bit this morning and did a lot of housework tonight. So, doing pretty good, and plus some studying as well for the class. How's everyone else doing?
I'm good. I was just getting my head around it because I'm the next day and I'm thinking, why would you be working today? But yeah,
Oh,
you're still yesterday, so you're only
yeah,
on the
you're
eve. That's why I was wondering why you would be at work.
yeah. I mean, being you are tomorrow for me, I'm just gonna have to do like Scotty does. You got the lottery numbers?
Wouldn't mind them for the big one.
Oh,
That's
I
huge.
know Scotty always asks that. That was pretty funny.
Yeah.
But anyhow, but we're doing good here in Southeast Tennessee. We were in low 70s today. Really, really nice. Supposed to be that tomorrow as well, which is odd. I guess for this time of year, we have had snow as early as Thanksgiving in the past, but last couple of years we've not had any really snow. Maybe some flurries, So but it's nice to enjoy a little bit of weather. But I think I saw come Monday and Tuesday we're going to be back in the winter swing of things. Instead of wearing the jacket, I'll be putting on the full blown coat when the wind starts blowing because it gets wind chill factor here. It will hit you with the humidity and the cold. But we're doing good. And tonight, anything? I guess Ronald, anything from last week?
No, no, very quiet.
Anything from last week?
Last week.
Okay, this week we're going to start chapter 3. We're going to try to get through verses through 1 through 3, but we'll see where we get. It's not a marathon. I've got some additional stuff I want to bring that I hadn't had planned, so it may extend this class into next week. Might just we were surprised last week we went a little bit over, but was able to finish chapter 2 from last week. But this week we're going to start chapter 3, verse 1, and we're going to be getting into a really interesting area of Genesis. It's a lot of speculations and sermons waxed, beautiful, I guess as you'd say it, from different areas of this first part of chapter 3 here with what's going on in the garden. We're going to be looking at some things that goes on and what we're going to learn from the Hebrew, from the sages of Israel. I'm going to do a little bit, do an alternate route here for the beginning than what I normally do. What I'm going to do is bring the information from on these verses here in the beginning from a lecture that, or I guess more of a teaching, not a lecture, but more of a teaching from Rabbi Singer, Tovia Singer, when he was chief rabbi down in Indonesia. Really good. What I'll do is, if this old head doesn't forget, I'll go snag the link to that video and put it down in the description when I work with the source materials with tonight's class. But because it's not very long, it's like 18 minutes long. But he's got a really good discussion that he's talking about a couple questions he was asked about the serpent, and we were going to get to that here in a moment. Right now, I want to go ahead and read you the passages that we hope to cover for this evening, and we'll get right into what Rabbi Singer had to say in conjunction with his questions that kind of line up with what we're going to be studying over the next couple of weeks, God willing. Chapter 3, verse 1, Genesis. Now the serpent, and I'm reading from the Hirsch Chumash that I use for my studies. It says, now the serpent was more cunning than any animal of the field that God had made. And it said to the woman, even if God has said so, are you really not to eat from all the trees of the garden? Verse 2, and the woman replied to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. In verse 3, but regarding the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, God said, you shall not eat so from it or touch it, lest you die. Now, Rabbi Singer, in his class that he was given, he brings out the point. He said the serpent was a second species on the earth that could speak. We're going to get a little bit more into detail about that here in a little bit further down. But there was a question that was asked, and he broke this question down into several other questions. I'll be honest with you, some of these, I guess, because we grew up, and like he says, all of us grow up. The majority of, humanity that's read from some form of Bible, be it a Jewish Bible or Christian Bible, anything like that. There's a lot of people on the planet are very familiar with this part of the scriptures within the creation, early Genesis, that we learned from a child. And we're familiar with it, so familiar that sometimes we don't think about some questions that's really could be asked here. And so as I was taking some notes as I was going through the video, and I was writing down these questions. So if you have some pen and paper or some form, if you want to write these down, or you can always go back and listen to this on YouTube when it's back up, and we can stop it and write these questions down. But these are some things to think about. First question he asked was, why was it important for the serpent to speak? Why was it important for the serpent to speak? Why did the serpent want Eve to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? So these are some questions I had never thought about it. He goes on, he says, what was the serpent's motive? What was he after? Again, why was it so important for this serpent to trick Eve to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? What was driving him? What was the purpose? Other than just being a temptation. We know that there's a lot of elements in this section of the passages we're going to be covering, many lessons that we can learn from in everyday life, which we'll hope to cover over the next couple of weeks. So why was it important for this serpent to speak? Why? I mean, why did he want Eve to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? So what was his motive? And Rabbi Singer brought out a very interesting point. We just covered a section of passages that can give us some interesting insight, because the majority of us, I'm going to say the majority of us, including myself, hadn't really considered this. But when we look at this in context of everything that's going on, and most people will just sit here and they'll read this and not think of anything about what went before this. But there was a major event that we just covered it in our studies. There's a major event that just happened that can give light on these questions. He said the serpent, as we are explained here by God in the Torah, he was the most cunning or intelligent animal of the field. He could walk and he could talk. And so therefore, Rabbi Singer brings the point out that this didn't surprise Eve and them, because they had already known about this creature. He could even reason. He could talk. He could walk with them. He could have some form of a relationship with them. It was the second species that the Creator made that could talk. And Rabbi Singer goes on and brings a point, which is, but talking, it's a major thing. He says, like writing, you got to learn to write. But even the scientists say that speaking is something that is inert in the human being. So this animal, he was still fully animal, but yet he had human characteristics. So what event happened that played a role in what we're going to be seeing here in the first part of chapter 3? In Genesis chapter 2, let's go back to Genesis chapter 2. We're going to look at verses 19 and 20. Let's see here. Then God herded together from all the ground all the animals of the field and all the birds of the sky, and brought them unto the man to see what he would call them. And everything that the man, as a living personality, calls it, it remained that name. And man gave names to all the cattle, to all the birds, all the sky, and to every animal of the field, but he found no helper fitting of man. Understand, the serpent was one of these animals in this event. Never thought about that. Never thought about that. Adam named him the Nachash, which I had a really good discussion with someone last week, which breaks that word down into other words. And one of the words of the Hebrew for Nachash, for the name of the Hebrew name of the serpent, also has, and it's interesting, ties to the very first thing that God calls about the serpent, that he was more cunning, brazen, arrogant. And the word there, in Hebrew, there's words for arrogancy, brazenness, that has the same letters as the serpent's name, but different vowel pronunciations. And it was really interesting how Andy was breaking down the serpent the word serpent, Nachash, in Hebrew, and taking it through and showing, and it all connects with this first trait that the Creator says he was the more cunning, brazen, arrogant of the field. And Rabbi Singer says to be able to do that, you have to have a form of intelligence. So, what just happened? The serpent was in this gathering here at the end of chapter 2. So, we find here at the beginning of chapter 3, he's approaching the woman. Understand, at this point in chapter 2, the woman didn't exist. She hadn't been created yet. He said he found no helper. Along with all of the other animals, even though the serpent could walk, could talk, could reason with Adam in his own language where no other animal could, he was rejected. He was rejected as being a suitable mate or helper of Adam. Immediately after his rejection, we find him approaching the woman. Ronald, is pretty interesting, isn't it? You mean it?
Yeah, yes, extremely. It was a good discussion had last Sunday with Andrew. It
So
opened up a lot of things, didn't it?
Yeah, when he got into the Hebrew of the Nachash, that was really good, and that was the first thing I saw when he mentioned the Hebrew word for brazenness or way they say now chutzpah.
Yeah.
But it has the exact same letters as the name of Nachash, but it's vowel pointed, so it's pronounced different.
Yeah.
But and that's in Hebrew is like that.
And I didn't know the Hebrew word, the Narkish, that I brought up early in the conversation. That when I heard that, I thought, wow, because in Hinduism, the snake is the Naga, and it's a very similar flow. You can see a correlation in the name from one culture to another.
So Rabbi Singer brings up this point of what was the major event that happened before chapter 3, before the appearance of the serpent and what he's doing, was that he was rejected by Adam. He wasn't good enough for Adam to have a relationship with, to be a helpmate. But yet he could speak, he could talk, he could walk with him, and he was rejected. And he wasn't happy that he was rejected. And then the serpent finds the wife. And what he begins to do here in chapter 3, and this is just only one of the lessons that we can learn from this, not the only one of many lessons that we can learn from this set of passages. Rabbi Singer says the serpent wasn't happy for being rejected by Adam. That he wasn't a fit for a relationship. So he seeks out and he finds the wife. And in what he is doing is to break up the relationship between the man and woman. If there could have been an animal, of any animal on the face of the planet, the serpent was the only one that had a possible fit. But he was rejected because he didn't have a same soul as Adam. And so if you remember, we talked about in the last couple of weeks, Adam was made from the dirt, the dead earth, and was breathed into and brought alive. The woman was made from living tissue, which contained the soul. She wasn't breathed upon, so her soul came from Adam. They share the same soul. But what Adam it wasn't just good enough to be able to walk and to talk and to carry on a conversation. The one thing that the woman had that the snake didn't have was the soul. And for that reason, the serpent's motive was to destroy the relationship between Adam and Eve. And because of this, he lost all of these attributes. He lost the ability to talk. He lost the ability to be cunning. He lost the ability to walk. And what's interesting, Rabbi Singer says, even science proves that all snakes has within them the joints that's just missing legs. And it's like a reminder that the Creator put on the serpent throughout its life, throughout the millennia that it has lived and existed. At one time it walked. Now it only has, the material is still there. It's just missing the legs. And the scientists have proved that all snakes have that. And he was bringing that out. And then he told him you would eat, and we're going to get into this. We're going to be repeating some of this when we get to these passages, but he's going to eat the dust of the earth, which means the dust is plenty, which means that it has everything that it needs and it will never need God. That was the punishment that went to the serpent. It would never need the Creator because it would have everything it needed and have no want for anything. Man was different. Man, for him to eat, he had to work the ground. When a woman gave birth, she had to have pain. All of this requires that humanity cry out to God. He put man in a position to seek God, to seek his help, to seek his favor. But the snake, he said, get out of my face. You'll have no need of me. And there's a really good teaching he has on that in comparison with Egypt, which we're not going to get into that here. We may do that when we get to these passages. So I wanted to bring that aspect first tonight, that there's a connection between the serpent and Adam just a few scriptures back. That's in the context of all these passages. We see that prior to the engagement of the serpent and Eve was that he was rejected. He was among the animals that was brought to Adam to be given a name, to look for a helpmate, and he didn't make the list. He doesn't even get to sit on the bench. He was completely rejected. And so we see that the motivation and the temptation that is being set up between Eve was to destroy the relationship to destroy the first marriage of the first human couple. Because he wanted that. He wanted what Eve got. So there's another lesson. Wanting what your neighbor has and you don't have. There's a lot of that going on with the trees and with the serpent that we can learn in this section. Now I'm going to start with if is there any questions or anything on YouTube or anything there? Okay, I'm going to move on to Rabbi Hirsch, because he goes from a very interesting direction about the difference between man and animal. Now we're shifting to another lesson that we can be learned in these first couple verses here of chapter 3. Rabbi Hirsch says the difference between man and animal is the touchstone of human morality. Human morality. The logic of an animal persuaded the first man to deviate from his path. See, this animal was cunning. He brought a very logical argument to the table. Today, it is this same animal logic that still serves as a midwife to all human sin. The story of the first sin is the story of all subsequent sins, as Rabbi Hirsch puts it. He said, the animals, they are endowed with instinct. And this instinct is the voice of God, the will of God, as it applies to them. Whatever the animals do is in accordance with their instinct, and they can act only according to their instinct. For animals, this instinct is a divine guidance operating within them. What animals do in accordance with their instinct is good, and any act from which their instinct restrains them is bad. Animals cannot err. They have only one nature, whose call they must heed. Not so with the case of man. Rabbi Hirsch goes on and says, he is to opt for the good and shun evil out of his own free will and a sense of duty. Even when he gives his physical nature its due, he must do so not because of the lure of his senses, but out of the sense of duty. And we see that going on in our society today. So many people are following animal senses, rejecting the duty of God to live a moral life. He goes on and says, even when he takes in physical pleasure, he must act in a moral freedom. Man must never be an animal. And we're seeing in our society, when people are choosing the animal, they're no longer acting human. They're no longer walking within the image of God that was in them. They've completely blocked that out. And they're following the serpent. The logic of the serpent. Therefore, he has within him a divine force besides physical drives. His physical nature must be a necessity to oppose to the good and attract to evil. We've got to have that attract to evil to be able to make the free will choice. If we don't have the free will choice to choose between good and evil, then God can't punish us for choosing evil. We'll get really big into that when we start understanding what happened at the time of the flood. Not because of urging of his senses, but in spite of it. In spite of what our senses are wanting to take us down, we stop. We choose the good. Through the freedom of divine nature, he is to fulfill his lofty divine calling. For this reason, the voice of God does not speak to him from within, but to him, telling him what is good and what is evil. We get that through his commandments. He's told us, which I just now thought of it, and I don't know the exact passages. What is Veronica or Ronald? You may know what it is. You know, man, it says, you know what God expects of you, to do good, walk humbly, with your God. We know what to do because he's told us what we to do and what we're not to do. He goes on and says, God's voice meets a resistance from man's physical nature as long as his nature remains independent and without guidance. God's voice that whispers within him, the innate consciousness whose messenger is the sense of shame that we discussed last time, serves only to warn man in general terms to do good and shun evil, precisely which acts are good and which acts are evil. This he can learn only from the mouth of God speaking to him from outside of himself. Rabbi Hirsch is using some interesting terminology there. And from without us, what we do is we see the acts of what's going on. We see the good, we see the evil. The animal merely develops its physical nature to which its intelligence is completely subservient. Man, however, was not placed in paradise to satisfy his physical nature with the delights offered there. He was placed in paradise to serve God there and to build his world. The service is man's task, and only for its sake was he permitted to partake in the fruits of paradise. The individual nature of an animal is the basis on which it accesses everything, because the animal was created for itself. An animal is very selfish. That's all it knows is itself. Man, however, was created to glorify God, to build his world, so he must gladly sacrifice his individual nature to this higher calling. He must learn what is good and what is evil, not in accordance with his individual nature, but in the according of his lofty calling. We learn what is good and what is evil based upon our calling. Like, and I'm teaching, like an example, when I'm teaching on idolatry, there are some specific acts that we are not permitted to do, those of us in the nations, that we are forbidden to do, that constitutes the act of idolatry. And when I'm talking to people who are just learning about this, one of the pieces of advice I like to share is to learn what you're not supposed to do. It's easy. It's not complicated. Just learn what you're not supposed to do and don't do it. Because there are times in our cultures, wherever we're at in the world, we're invited to, family events from work, where there's idolatrous things that might be there. Sometimes we're invited to weddings and funerals that goes into, different kinds of temples and things like that. And Jews, they're forbidden. No, the answer is no right off the bat for them. We have a little leniency in these areas, depending on what's going to be going on. And then if it's going to be something strictly religious toward that, to the deity, then we don't go. But if it's not going to be, then we need to learn what we're not supposed to partake in. And this allows us to be a part of our culture, a part of our families, part of our friends, life, events that happens. And so this is what he's talking about here. He must gladly sacrifice his individual nature for his higher calling, meaning that we sometimes have to say no to some things because the no's to what God tells us no to is higher. It's a loftier, it's a higher calling. He goes on, Rabbi Hirsch goes on and said, he must learn what is good and what is evil. And that's what I'm talking about. We need to learn what God expects of us. What he and a lot of what he doesn't want us to do, which is not a lot and it's not hard, reveals a lot of what we should be doing. And examples. An example is we have a prohibition of theft. But on the positive side of that, there is no prohibition of giving. And I've heard of people who have been, who had a problem with stealing. Nothing major, just petty theft and stuff. And I've heard advice given to them from Torah, from the Torah sages, from the rabbis, saying, when you have the urge to pick up and take something that's not yours, instead of doing that, go give to some charity. Fight that urge to steal with the action of giving. So there's yes, God forbids us to do certain things, but those certain things can also show us the positive things he wants us to do. And that's another lesson of itself when we go through the individual seven laws. He said, for this reason, the tree was appealing to his senses, and its fruit was enticing to him. Everything in his individual nature told him this is good, but God's word to him forbade him to eat the fruit of the tree and told him that to do so would be evil. This was the rule by which man was to differentiate between good and evil. This was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He goes on, Rabbi Hirsch says, our sages too see in God's word to man the revelation of all of man's duties, which points back to 2:16 that we went through for a couple weeks. And one of the things that's also seen here, another lesson, when God gave them all the trees of the field to eat, but there's one that you're not supposed to. God is introducing man to the subject of boundaries. There's places you go, there are places you don't go. There's things that you own, there are things that you don't own. God gave him all the trees of the field but one. That one belonged to him. And when you take something that doesn't belong to you, that's theft. So technically, as we get over here in the verse 16 and stuff like that, we're going to see that before the eating of that fruit, theft was committed first. So we're going to learn that they took from the tree. Took for something that didn't belong to them. They stepped across their neighbor's fence, so to speak. At this point, man encounters animal logic in the form of its cleverest representative, the serpent. Even the cleverest of all animals is incapable of understanding how man could possibly forego the pleasure that becomes available to him. You know, there is scores of people, and I'm going to say that there's scores of people. I'm going to speak of the United States. That's where I live. I can speak of this right here where I live in Southeast Tennessee. I see it all the time. There are people that can't understand the morality of not doing something, not acting in a particular way. They're acting like an animal when everything is just for them. And the morality and ethics just fly over their head. They can't comprehend it for some reason. They're like the serpent. They can't understand how someone can forego a pleasure that's available to him. And right now, this world is starving for people to forego pleasures that's available to him and look at the moral and the ethics of what's going on. And quit crying like a kid at Walmart flinging around on the floor because mama said no because he wasn't going to buy a toy for him. But that's what's going on in this world. When you see that, when you see grown adults flopping around the streets and in other public places because they're not getting what they want, they're acting. The serpent has taken completely control of them. Again, another lesson that we can learn from this. Rabbi Hirsch says, even if God has said so, the dialogue begins with the conversation in full swing. Man has already explained that he must refrain from eating because God had commanded him to refrain. That is one. This right here is a main element when we talk about Noahides or whatever name, B'nai Noah, the children of Noah, which I prefer. We obey what he said because he commanded us. That is the difference. There is a wisdom behind doing many of these things, of not doing theft and not doing murder. But when we do it because God has told us, I don't want you doing that, that takes you to a higher level of service. Even if God has said so, does that mean that you must really obey? That was the question from the serpent. Is not the urge within you also the voice of God? If it were indeed bad for you to partake of this fruit, why did God make the fruit so appealing and arouse within you the desires to eat it? Isn't he thus clearly telling you that you and this pleasure were made for each other? Isn't this voice his earlier and clearer voice? Would God create such delights and cause you to desire them only to forbid them from you? Again, if evil wasn't beautiful, we would have no problem with it. Prostitutes don't put on their pajamas that they wear around their pillow hair and walk on the streets. They doll up, become ladies of the evening. Evil, there's a lot of evil out there that's beautiful. Evil disguises itself in beauty, and it can trap us. That's why, again, we need to know what God has commanded us. That's a very important for us in the nations, is to learn what God has commanded us. He doesn't tell us to follow him in faith. He tells us to follow him in obeying his commands. His commands are not burdensome. They're moral and they're right and they're just. Thus spoke the serpent, and thus the animal logic still speaks to us today in a straightforward terms or philosophical guise. Whenever an express command from God prohibits us from partaking of a pleasure, as the serpent did then, so animal logic today employs exaggeration. A little is prohibited, but much is permitted. Yet, animal logic sees only the prohibition and presents God's moral law as an enemy of all the senses of pleasure. And that is so true with some religions. It talks about how they dog the law of God. Well, one, they don't understand the law of God, and they make a lot of erroneous, statements. But to the animal logic, it only sees a prohibition. It presents God's moral law as an enemy. What is being shouted on a lot of newscasts all over Facebook? How morality is the enemy, and how all this immorality is the new morality. And we've known it's going to happen when there's a generation that will just come alive and say that which is good is bad and that which is bad is good. And we have seen it flipped in the last 15, 20 years. We have seen this flipped in front of our eyes worldwide. Verse 2 and 3, and the woman replied to the serpent, that we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but regarding the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, you shall not eat from it or touch it, lest you die. Rabbi Hirsch responds, he goes on and says, the response is still a proper one. Not everything is forbidden to us. Not everything is forbidden. God, who has permitted us all the trees of the garden, has forbidden us to this one tree. There is one point, however, that we should notice, a point that was noticed by our sages of blessed memory. We have already seen that all the elements that characterize the future Torah of Israel and at what's called in the Hebrew, the Yetzer Hara, or the sensual nature, our sensual nature, and also to much of the non-Jewish world, have always taken umbrage and are contained in the first command. This first command is a huch. It's a statute. It's a command that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make logical sense. We can make logical sense out of theft and murder, forbidden sexual relations. There's logic there, but this first command, especially to us, doesn't make sense. For the Jews, they have commands they obey every day that doesn't make sense, but they do because they were commanded to do. It was transmitted to Eve. Eve's response adds a fourth element, which likewise is objective to be a shallow and reckless. It's called a protective fence. Now, protective fences are not wrong. Protective fences has a purpose in our life. There's many programs out there that we have fences around things to keep us from stepping over where we don't need to go that can cause us harm. Like, with the drug addictions and the alcohol addiction programs, they help these folks put fences around so they don't go to areas where they can be tempted. They don't, there's things that they do to say, I'm doing this. It's a guardrail. It's a guardrail, like going around a curve and there's a bluff right there. That guardrail is going to keep you from danger. But in this situation, it went a little bit further than just a protective fence. He says, God prohibited eating of the fruit of the tree, whereas the woman mentions a prohibition against touching it. This then was a safeguard. Adam had put this safeguard in there to protect his wife. He added to the commandment in order to keep far from transgression. Thus we see that there are natural consequences that is required of those who observes the commandments, meaning there's a natural consequence. We are commanded, as we learned in verse 16, we learn that one who is given a command is a guardian of that command. And so he was given that command, so he was guarding the command and guarding his wife. If you don't touch it, then you're most likely not going to eat from or take from the tree. But he says the sages here says, however, attach a warning. Do not make a fence too high, lest it fall and destroy the plants it was meant to protect. Thus God said, on that day you eat of it, you must die. But she falsely attached that God had said, do not touch it. It wasn't that God said not touch it. It was Adam, her husband. This is where she made the mistake. Because she told the serpent, God said, don't touch it. And the serpent knew that God didn't say that. When the serpent recognized this falsehood, he pushed her against the tree, and he said to her, just as you have not died for touching it, you will not die from eating it. That comes from Midrash. We must not lose sight of the origin of these safeguards, which devolve upon us as a result of protecting us from transgressing. We must always remember that we are to protect ourselves from these transgressions, but we're not to say that God said not to do this or that in attachment to the commandment. Only as long as we remember that they will serve as a safeguard. If we make a safeguard to say that you go to a friend's house, they're serving wine at the dinner, you choose water, choose Sprite to keep you from partaking, that's a safeguard. That's fine. But that's something you're doing to protect yourself, and that's not wrong. But as long as we say, well, God says I'm not supposed to, to touch that. I'm not supposed to drink that. No, he didn't say that. But in situations, there are situations where we protect ourselves. And we have to protect ourselves. And that's something those of us in the nations aren't used to. In general, we're not used to safeguarding ourselves from transgression, the commandments. But if we forget that this is their character, if we regard them to as be pronounced by God, then the violation of them will lead us to violate God's commandment. If we, basically what he's saying, if we say that our safeguards is what God's commanded us, then it's going to lead to us violating the commandment because we went a little bit too far. He ends here on the discussion of verses 3 here. He says, our sages themselves abide by this warning. They always are careful to clarify and to clearly differentiate from a safeguard and a command. Adam erred in this respect. He equated touching with eating and transmitted both as a command pronounced by God. And thus the animal put her in a situation where she touched the tree. Well, you didn't die. So if you were told you were going to die if you touched it, then there's no problem. So immediately just go on and violate it because what God told you was a lie. He was able to use animal logic with the woman, but she wasn't properly trained. And that's another lesson right here for those of us in the nations. The prophecies teach us, Zechariah 8, Isaiah chapter 2, and many others, that we're going to turn to the Jews, to Yehuda. In Hebrew it says Yehuda. In Zechariah chapter 8, the 10 men of the nations will grab the garment of a Yehuda, a person of the tribe of Judah, and say, take us with you because we know God's with you. We're going to learn properly from them God's will, what God wants for humanity. That's why we teach on the 7 commands, because this was passed down from Adam to Noah to Abraham, and then from Abraham it came upon Moses' duty to reaffirm it in the Torah of Sinai for the nations. Now we get our authority from Moses. It's the oldest monotheistic belief system on the planet. We're returning to the original. It's held up by the rainbow, which we're going to get to. And when we get to Genesis chapter 9, to show that the rainbow is a sign that we should be observing the 7 commandments. I'm going to show you that when we get there. Just give you some stuff to chew on to have you stay with us there. Kind of like they do at the movies, those cliffhangers that they do. But no, there's just so much evidence in the Torah, all the way from Genesis 1 forward, that there were instructions given to mankind, and all instructions are given orally. So the fight between oral and written, if it ain't written, well, the written came second. There's never been a commandment written first. It was always given orally first. I actually learned that one from Rabbi Singer too. Because before Moses wrote the scrolls, God told him, go speak to the children of Israel. It was all oral. And so you can't say, well, if it's not written, no, it's oral. And it has been oral since Adam. And now it's been passed down to us from Moses through the teachers of Israel, the proper teachers of Israel, what we the nations is required to do to live a harmonious and justful life. It's beautiful what God wants from us. But here we see that Adam erred. He added to the commandment by saying, touching and eating will cause death. And he transmitted that to his wife as though God said it. And how many times has a preacher got on stage, well, God spoke to me? Believe me, I've done that in the past. I'm a former pastor, associate pastor, so I'm guilty of that one myself. We got to be careful. It's why I teach, know what God expects from you. And we learn that, and it's very simple. Whether pertaining to idolatry, to theft, to murder, to forbidden sexual relations, all of this, to justice. We've got to learn it properly so that we know when we're confronted with something, we're not going to approach it with an error. That something was added to that, and we think that God told us to do it when he didn't. And it's so important for us to know. That's something I heart, all the time is we need to know our commandments. That's what we're about. Part of what we're about at Outreach Noah Studies is not only we're learning Genesis, and we're doing that because I was asked about that a while back to do this, but to learn our commandments. And what I teach is what the sages teach, what the rabbis teach us to do. I don't add my flair to it. I may throw an example in there showing how what we learn can apply. But for what God says, I don't add anything to that. I teach what Rabbi Hirsch is teaching here. He's a well-established sage of Israel. My art scroll, all my books back here have approval by the rabbinic Beit Dins of Israel and head rabbis. I don't teach anything outside of what they teach. I don't have any authority to change the word of God. And I don't have the authority to change what it means. And so that's the route that I go when I'm teaching. It's what we do here. And anyone wants to come and learn, come and learn. We'll have fun. Won't we, Ronald?
Most definitely.
And we have some good conversations sometimes, don't we?
Yeah.
It's good to chew on this stuff, and to talk to one another, because how you're learning how to apply a mitzvah, a command for you personally might inspire someone else, that in your place of your life, this is how this command comes alive, and it's always good to hear how others experiences the opportunities to observe the commandments of God.
Yeah. And by being
Ronald,
in the group, you learn
8.
from others. You learn from others when you're in the group. You things you haven't thought of come into conversation, and
we do that with Andrew
to,
almost every Sunday.
Yes, very much so. And you learn how to deal with things, or how to approach things. Even you learn how to disseminate things yourself along the way. You improve yourself by having a better understanding of how to pull things apart,
Right.
and find the stronger meanings.
Well, Ronald, it's right there at 8:00, and I got through all 3 verses with an additional introduction.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I said, I'll go over and grab the link to the video, Rabbi Singer's video of the information I gave at front, and you'll get to hear him, because there's more that he gave than what I gave. I just was really inspired by the questions that he was asking, so I wrote the questions down for myself. I got a whole page of notes of questions and everything about the issue of the serpent, and him tying that to Genesis chapter 2, verses 19 and 20. And he's connecting Genesis chapter 3, bringing it all in context. And it's one of the understandings as we've seen in just this one little study, that there's multiple understandings that we can learn from all of this.
Came at the right time, didn't it, prior to this study today?
Yep. Okay, we
Hey,
can bring class to a close if you want to. If anybody's got any questions, they've been quiet tonight.
yeah, there's nothing from YouTube at the moment.
We need to get Christina back in her and her wooden spoon.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking. I thought you might turn up today. She had a busy day with family yesterday. Some of them coming up
Yeah,
from a fair distance.
I think they got it. Don't they have a pretty good large family that they all live on
Well,
the ranch together?
there are three generations on the one property.
Yeah,
There's others that live off property as well, and distance away.
yeah. And now in Australia, isn't that called a station and not a ranch?
Yeah. Well, actually, it'd probably be classified as a cattle farm, I think. But we
A
do
cattle
have the
farm?
stations are more in the outback, and they're as big as
Okay,
some states as of some. They're as big as some American states.
right.
They're called. That's when they get to a station. But yeah, we usually just use the word farm, but it can still be quite huge. So yeah, they're into beef cattle.
I've seen some pictures. She has had some short videos and pictures. It looks like she's got a very beautiful place out there.
Yeah, yes. The house she's in is the original house on the property, and it's an early house, been renovated up and everything, so it's really up to scratch. But yeah,
That's good.
she needs to put some outside photos of it up. I only see the inside.
There you go.
I'd like to see the layout, the design. But yep, yeah, I thought she might have been here today, but yeah, she's still
She's
goes a bit
probably got a lot
slower
of
at
family.
times. She has to pace herself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and I'd like to thank Bob, Bob, and Veronica for being here tonight. And I realised Amuel, she may be away out with family. Oh, I'm not sure. But yeah, thank you all for coming in. And thank you for those who will be listening on Power Faith Radio. And as I said earlier, if you have any questions you'd like to put to us, just email them to outreachnoah@gmail.com. And we will see you back. Are we going to do it on New Year's Eve? Is it,
It's just up to y'all. I'm with whatever.
Terry, if I could have a minute,
yep.
Go ahead.
I don't have a question, but I'd like to apologize for the little disturbance I caused last week. With
I didn't know. I don't remember you making a disturbance.
you noticed it
Yeah, the
went
gift.
up on the screen. I couldn't tell what it was me doing it, but I didn't know I was doing it, and you noticed it because you commented on it and
Oh, I did. Okay.
stopped
Yeah,
the class for.
that was the animation version of Bob that was being created or something, was it?
Oh, okay. All
Yeah.
righty.
Exactly that. It was me trying to do
Mm.
that. I in my panic to try to stop it, I didn't realize I was muted because Terry's saying, "Okay, does everybody see that?" And I was trying to say it was me, but I was muted. But I was panicking and I was trying to, oh no, I'm doing something. So I undo it.
Yeah.
But
I was
I
trying
just
to
wanted
work out.
I interrupted the class and I didn't mean to, and I tried to not do it again.
Yeah,
Oh.
well, I was trying to work out how it happened because it's sort of like a share screen, but you would have had to
Yeah.
have asked to be able to share the screen. There
Well,
must
I
have
Oh,
been
didn't.
that.
some.
Okay, now I remember. See, man,
Yeah.
I've slept since then. Now I remember.
Yeah, I couldn't see what was happening. All I could see
Yeah.
was Terry. But I went
Yeah.
Okay.
back and watched YouTube, and I saw what had happened.
Yeah, I'd like to
And
know how it happened. How it, it usually only changes screen if it's a sound. A sound. If someone makes a
You may
noise
have
or
actually.
there's background talking, if it's on speaker view, it'll flick to you. But
No, I wasn't.
there wasn't any sound with it. It was just the animation. And I thought, well, there's no share screen on because you'd have to have asked to share and been permitted to. So I'm thinking, how did that get out there?
You think that that's how it is, but that's not how it was that time.
Yeah, that's
But
all right.
Yeah. Yeah, we
I
have
just want
glitches. Things happen.
Yeah.
We're still growing the channel since we've had the changes, since Scotty had to step aside. So, bugs are bugs. We'll get through it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's all I just wanted to say that.
Well, thank you.
Okay. Well, then I will close down the live stream, and we will be back. We will be back next week, Terry. You
We'll make a decision on that, and we'll post it
post it.
in
Yeah.
both Facebook
Yeah.
groups.
Yeah, I'm glad I just thought of it because I'm thinking, oh yeah, well, today and next year's, is the party time.
Well, sometimes we get invited with my daughter and
Yeah.
stuff to do. My wife and I generally don't do anything, but now my daughter's a manager down here at Tremont. It's a local pub tap house, and sometimes they'll have music, and if it's some kind of music that we like, she'll invite us.
Right.
But we hadn't got that far yet.
Yep. Okay. Well, we will post on a simple walk. It'll probably be put on Veronica's Simply Noahide as well, and I'll place it on the Australian groups.
We'll cover all three bases.
And I'm covering it on in the Noahide International Network now. I'm posting it.
Okay.
The meetings there as well now. I don't worry about the one you do earlier. I just post, like when I post the time, the link this morning for you. I post it there as well. So there's another avenue for it to be seen.
Okay. Appreciate that.
That's Dan out of Canada. So yeah.
Yeah. If you enjoy these kind of studies, subscribe, like, share, help us grow the channel. If you've got any, like he said, any questions, any suggestions or anything like that, also drop us that email down at outreachnoah@gmail.com. But we'll see, if we don't see y'all next week, y'all have a good new year. Those who celebrate the new year. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay. Will we be back next Thursday with Veronica's?
Is it Veronica? Is it tomorrow?
No, it's next week.
Next week.
Good question.
Is it next week?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I done told my wife I had book club tomorrow.
Yeah, well, I was going to look at that earlier. I couldn't remember. Yes, it's next week.
Good question. I hadn't really paid attention to my calendar.
I believe it is. I believe it is next week.
Yeah, but it's not on my calendar for tomorrow. So yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. Depends on if y'all are out there partying or not. And hangover.
I won't be hungover.
All righty.
I'll probably do it.
You'll post that too, will you, Veronica, if there's a change? Oh, in the chat you do for it. Yeah. Just let us know.
I'll probably, we'll probably have it. I mean, I don't really do anything on New Year's anyway, so.
I don't either.
So having it next week.
Okay.
All righty.
Sounds good. See y'all.
Yep. Y'all have a good weekend.
Okay. Have a good week, everybody.
All right, bye-bye.
See you later. Bob.